Green light is negative. I repeat, negative. Do not engage. You are Winchester on intel. The voice in the earpiece was distorted by static and the rhythmic thrum of the medevac chopper miles away. Command, this is Vulture 2-1. I have visual on the HVT. He's rigging the vest. If he steps out that door, the team in the courtyard is dust, Ilara whispered, her throat dry, tasting the copper tang of adrenaline. Through the Leupold Mark V HD scope, the world was reduced to crosshairs and heat mirage. 2-1, you are a trainee attached for observation. You do not have clearance to take that shot. Stand down, kid. That's an order. Ilara's finger hovered over the trigger of the Macmillan TAC 338. The wind was reading 12 mph, full value from the left. Distance, 1,400 meters. Impossible for a veteran, let alone a 17-year-old girl shaking from dehydration. He's opening the door, she murmured. Her heart rate forcibly slowed to 40 beats per minute. Chief Graves is right in the blast radius. Vulture 2-1. If you pull that trigger and miss, or if you hit a civilian, you will be court-martialed before your boots hit the tarmac. Do you copy? She watched the target's thumb move toward the detonator. She watched Chief Graves, the man who had laughed in her face 3 days ago, unknowingly turn his back to the threat. I copy, Ilara lied. She exhaled. The world went silent. Bang. 72 hours earlier, Nevada test and training range. The heat in the Nevada desert didn't just sit on you. It tried to crush you. It was a physical weight, pressing down on the shoulders, the lungs, the eyelids. Private Ilara Vance stepped off the rear ramp of the C-130 Hercules and immediately felt the moisture suck from her pores. The tarmac at Creech Air Force Base shimmered in a hallucination of waves, distorting the horizon where the jagged mountains met the bleached sky. She adjusted the straps of her rucksack. It weighed 65 pounds. Ilara weighed 112. Move it, hardware! We aren't paid by the hour! A jumpmaster screamed over the whine of the engines. Ilara kept her head down, eyes fixed on the boots of the man in front of her. She was a ghost in the system, 17 years old. A waiver, a signature on a piece of paper that said her visual cortex processed information 20% faster than the average human, and her resting heart rate sat comfortably at 38. To the brass, she was a fascinating biological experiment. To the platoon of Navy SEALs waiting by the convoy of Humvees, she was a joke. Check it out, a voice drawled, cutting through the hot wind. Did the Girl Scouts get lost on the way to the cookie drive? Laughter rippled through the group of men. They were giants, bearded, tanned, arms thick with muscle and tattoos, standing with the casual arrogance of apex predators. They wore multicam pants and t-shirts, gear slung carelessly, radiating a cohesion that took years of blood to forge. Ilara walked toward them. She wore standard issue fatigues that looked 2 sizes too big, despite being an extra small. She stopped 5 feet from the man who had spoken, Master Chief Jonas Breaker Graves. She knew his dossier by heart. 12 deployments, Silver Star. A reputation for eating junior officers for breakfast and spitting out their careers before lunch. He looked down at her, his eyes hidden behind Oakley sunglasses, his beard flecked with gray dust. Private Vance reporting for ASIP integration, she said. Her voice was steady, but it sounded thin in the open air. Graves didn't salute. He didn't even nod. He leaned down, invading her personal space, smelling of tobacco and gun oil. How old are you, Vance? 17, Master Chief. 17, he repeated, tasting the word like spoiled milk. He looked back at his men. We got a babysitting detail, boys. Command sent us a high school dropout to test the new long guns. Seriously? Another SEAL, a sniper named Miller, scoffed. I've got boots older than her. Does she even need to shave? I am qualified on the platform, Master Chief, Ilara said, her jaw tightening. I'm here to shoot. Graves laughed, a harsh, barking sound. You're here because some admiral wants to see if the gender integration metrics look good on a PowerPoint slide. You see that truck? He pointed to the lead vehicle. That's the extraction point. But we aren't driving. We're rucking to the range. 20 clicks. Rough terrain. 115 degrees. He paused, waiting for her to break. Waiting for the fear. If you fall out, Graves said softly, dangerously, you don't get a ride. You get a flight home and a dishonorable discharge for wasting my time. Do you understand? Ilara looked at the distant mountains. The heat was already making her head thrum, but her heart rate remained steady. Thump, thump, thump. I understand, Master Chief. Good. Graves turned his back on her, dismissing her existence. Miller, give her the extra ammo cans. If she wants to be a shooter, she carries the lead. Miller grinned and hoisted 2 heavy green metal boxes, slamming them onto the tarmac in front of her. They added another 30 pounds to her load. It was hazing, pure and simple. It was designed to break her spine before she even took a step. Ilara didn't complain. She didn't look for help. She knelt, securing the cans to her external frame with grim precision. When she stood up, her knees buckled slightly, a microscopic tremor that she locked down instantly. She adjusted her center of gravity, forcing her spine to accept the crushing burden. She looked up. Graves was watching her from the rearview mirror of the truck, his expression unreadable. Let's move, she whispered to herself. The desert waited. It didn't care about her age, her gender, or the jeers of the men. It only cared if she could survive. And Ilara Vance had no intention of dying today. The pace was not a walk. It was a punishment. Step it out, ladies. Daylight is burning. Graves's voice crackled over the localized comms, devoid of exertion. Ilara Vance focused on the heels of the operator 10 meters ahead of her. The dust kicked up by his boots coated her tongue, a gritty reminder of her position at the rear of the column. The 20-kilometer ruck march wasn't just about distance. It was about the rate of movement over broken terrain. Graves had set a pace of 4 miles per hour, a forced march standard for candidates twice her size. The straps of the Alice pack dug into her clavicles, cutting off circulation to her arms. The 2 extra ammo cans Miller had forced on her threw off her center of gravity, pulling her shoulders forward and forcing her lower back to compensate. Every step sent a shockwave of pain up her shins. Check your intervals, Graves ordered. Vance, close the gap. You're drifting. Copy, she wheezed, her chest heaving against the ballistic plate carrier. She forced her legs to cycle faster. The heat was a tangible enemy now. It radiated off the canyon walls, turning the air into a convection oven. She sucked on the bite valve of her hydration bladder, but the water was hot, tasting of warm plastic and chlorine. It did nothing to cool the fire in her core. They were 8 kilometers in. Her quadriceps felt like they were filled with wet cement. The SEALs moved with an efficient, loping gait, their bodies conditioned by years of hell weeks and combat deployments. They made it look easy. For Ilara, every yard was a negotiation with gravity. Pain is information, her father's voice echoed in her head. It tells you you're still alive. It tells you where the limits are so you can break them. She stumbled on a loose piece of shale. Her knee buckled, scraping against a jagged rock. The weight of the pack threatened to topple her completely. She slammed her hand down, catching herself, gasping as the impact jarred her wrist. A shadow fell over her. It was Miller. The sniper had doubled back from his position in the formation. He loomed over her, not even breathing hard. "Heavy, isn't it, sweetheart?" Miller asked. He didn't offer a hand to help her up. He reached for the ammo cans strapped to her pack. "Give them here. You're slowing us down. The chief wants to make the Aron site before sunset, and you're dragging anchor." It was an offer of mercy. It was an offer of defeat. If she handed over the weight, she admitted she couldn't hack it. Ilara slapped his hand away. The sound was sharp in the canyon silence. She gritted her teeth and pushed herself upright, her legs trembling violently. "I am responsible for my gear, petty officer." Miller pulled his hand back, eyebrows raised. "Suit yourself. It's a long walk to the washout." "Get back in formation, Miller." Graves's voice cut through the comms, sharp and knowing. "Let the kid carry her cross." Miller smirked and jogged back to his spot. Ilara stared at his back. The anger flared in her chest, hot and cleansing. It burned away the fatigue for a split second. They wanted her to quit. They were betting on it. She checked her watch. 10 kilometers left. She adjusted her stride, locking her eyes on the horizon. She didn't look at the rocks. She didn't look at the sun. She visualized the target at the end of the road. The hours blurred into a rhythmic torture. The sun dipped below the canyon rim, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. The temperature dropped 10 degrees, but the sweat on her skin turned cold and clammy, a warning sign of exhaustion. When the formation finally halted at the Remain overnight site, a small depression shielded by boulders, Ilara didn't sit down. If she sat, she knew she wouldn't get back up. She stood while the SEALs dropped their rucks, laughing and cracking chemlights. She stood until the trembling in her legs subsided to a dull vibration. Only then did she unclasp the waist belt. The pack hit the ground with a heavy thud. Ilara swayed. The world tilted on its axis. "Time?" Graves asked, walking past her. He didn't look at her face. He looked at her boots. 1845, Master Chief, the radio man answered. "We made time," Graves grunted. He paused near Ilara. He didn't praise her. He didn't acknowledge the extra ammo cans. He just looked at the way she was standing, wobbly, pale, but vertical. "Hydrate, Vance," he said, his voice flat. "Range goes hot at 0600. If you pass out on my firing line, I'll leave you for the buzzards." "Hoo-yah, Master Chief," she whispered. He walked away. Ilara sank to her knees, pulling a protein bar from her pocket. Her hands shook so hard she could barely tear the wrapper. She ate it slowly, staring into the gathering dark. She had survived the walk, but tomorrow she had to shoot. And she knew Graves was done playing games. The desert at dawn was a deceptive creature. 12 hours ago, it had been a furnace. Now, it was a freezer. Frost coated the barrel of the Macmillan TC-338, glistening like diamond dust under the pale wash of the rising sun. Ilara lay prone on the shooting mat, her body rigid. The cold seeped through the nylon of her fatigues, numbing her elbows and knees, but she didn't shiver. Shivering moved the reticle. Shivering meant a miss. "Range is hot," Miller announced from the spotting scope to her left. "Target is the steel plate at 1,000 meters. Unknown wind. One shot. Cold bore." 1,000 meters. A kilometer of dead air, gravity, and variable currents between her muzzle and a 12-inch square of hardened steel. Ilara exhaled, watching her breath plume in the frigid air. She reached for her kestrel weather meter. The small device spun lazily in the breeze. 3.5 miles per hour. Full value from the 9 o'clock, she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. She dialed the elevation turret on her loopholed scope. 9.8 miles up. She moved her hand to the windage knob. Computer says hold left edge. Graves's voice rasped from directly behind her. He wasn't spotting, he was hovering. The math doesn't lie, does it, Vance? Ilara froze. The kestrel was reading a steady, light breeze. Standard ballistic software dictated a hold of 0.6 mils left. It was the safe shot. It was the textbook shot. But through the high magnification lens, something was wrong. The mirage, the shimmering heat waves rising from the desert floor, wasn't flowing left to right like the wind at her position. Downrange, at the 600-meter mark, the scrub brush was twitching in the opposite direction. The canyon geography was funneling a draft that the kestrel couldn't taste. Target is up, Miller said, bored. Take the shot or clear the line. Hesitation kills, Graves taunted softly. If you need a calculator to tell you how to kill, you're already dead. Trust the machine, kid. It's smarter than you are. His words were designed to make her doubt. If she followed the computer and missed, he would blame her incompetence. If she ignored the computer and missed, he would blame her arrogance. It was a trap. Ilara took her hand off the windage knob. She ignored the kestrel. She ignored the expensive ballistic computer mounted to her rail. She stared at the mirage. It was boiling, flattening out near the target. The wind downrange was faster than the wind at the firing line, and it was swirling. Trust the eye, she told herself. She shifted her body slightly, loading the bipod. She didn't dial the wind. She was going to hold off. She placed the crosshair not on the left edge, but significantly further, favoring a phantom wind that the sensors said didn't exist. What are you doing? Graves snapped. That's too much hold. Ilara didn't answer. She inhaled deep into her diaphragm, expanding her lungs, then let it out halfway. The pause. The respiratory pause where the heart hangs suspended between beats. Her pulse slowed. Thump. Thump. She squeezed the trigger. It wasn't a pull. It was a break of glass. The rifle roared, the muzzle brake directing the concussive blast sideways, kicking up a cloud of dust that momentarily obscured the scope. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, but she kept her eye glued to the optic, riding the recoil to see the trace. 1 second, 2 seconds. The bullet was a supersonic traveler in a silent world. Clang. The sound of the impact drifted back to them a beat later, a distinct, metallic ring that sang of perfection. Impact! Miller called out, his voice tinged with genuine surprise. Dead center! Bullseye! Ilara cycled the bolt, ejecting the spent brass casing. It spun through the air, smoking, and landed near Graves's boot. She didn't look back at him. She kept her eye on the target, watching the swing of the steel plate slow down. Wind at the muzzle was 3, Ilara said, her voice flat, finally breaking her silence. But the draw in the canyon at 600 meters was pushing 8. The computer was wrong. She rolled onto her side and looked up. Graves was staring at the target through his binoculars. His jaw was set tight, the muscles in his neck cording. He lowered the glasses slowly and looked down at her. There was no praise in his eyes, only a cold calculation. He had wanted her to fail, but she had just proven that her senses were sharper than his equipment. Even a blind squirrel finds a nut, Graves muttered. He kicked the spent brass casing away. "Don't get cocky. Static targets don't shoot back. Pack up. We're moving to the kill house." He turned and walked away, his boots crunching on the frost. Ilara reached out and picked up the warm brass casing. She wiped the dust off it and slipped it into her pocket. It was the first point on the board. "Nice shot," Miller whispered as he passed her, almost inaudible. Ilara didn't smile. She re-engaged the safety on her rifle. The cold bore was done. Now the heat was coming back. The kill house was a sprawling labyrinth of raw plywood and tires, designed to mimic the claustrophobic nightmare of urban warfare. It smelled of sawdust and the acrid metallic tang of simulation rounds, soap-like paint bullets that hit hard enough to leave welts and break skin. "Vance, you're up top. Overwatch position Alpha," Graves ordered, pointing to a scaffolding tower overlooking the maze. "You are eyes only. Do not engage unless I give the green light. We don't need you flagging my men in a hallway." "Copy, Master Chief," Ilara said, slinging her rifle. She climbed the ladder, the metal rungs burning her hands. While the SEALs stacked up on the ground floor, checking their MP7 submachine guns and flashbangs, Ilara settled into a prone position on the grate 20 feet above. From here, the kill house looked like a rat maze. She could see into the open-topped rooms, tracing the intended path of the squad. "Stack is set," Miller's voice crackled in her earpiece. "Breaching in 3, 2... Ilara scanned the layout. The target building was a 3-room structure. The squad was preparing to breach the front door, but her elevated angle gave her a view they didn't have. Through the dirty plexiglass of a side window in the second room, the fatal funnel they would enter immediately after clearing the first, she saw a silhouette. It wasn't a standard cardboard target. It was a mannequin rigged with a bulky vest, wires trailing to the door handle of the connecting room. A booby trap, a suicide vest simulator. If they breached the second door, the sensor would trip, and the blast would wipe out the entire stack. "Hold," Ilara said, pressing her comms button. "Vulture 2-1 to lead. You have a rigged HVT in the second room. Door is wired. Do not breach." Silence on the line. "Say again, 2-1?" Miller asked, sounding annoyed. "I have visual on a suicide vest," Ilara repeated, her voice urgent. "North wall, room 2. It's rigged to the door handle. You need to find an alternate entry." "Negative 2-1, Graves cut in, his voice hard. "Intel says room 2 is clear. We are on a timeline. Stop ghost hunting and keep the channel clear. Breaching." "Chief, I can see the wires," Ilara insisted, gripping the railing. "If you open that door, you're dead." "I said clear the comms," Graves roared. "Execute!" Ilara watched helplessly from above. The SEALs moved with terrifying speed. Boom. A flashbang detonated in the first room. They flowed in like water, weapons snapping left and right. "Clear right! Clear left!" They stacked on the second door, the door Ilara had warned them about. "Don't do it," she whispered. Graves, taking point, reached for the handle. He didn't hesitate. He kicked the door and swung inward. Beep-zzz-zzz-zzz. A deafening siren wailed from the speakers mounted in the room, accompanied by a strobe light flashing red. The simulation system registered the trigger. "Catastrophic kill!" The range control officer's voice boomed over the PA system. "IED detonation. Entire stack is KIA. Reset at the start point." The SEALs froze. The momentum died instantly. Graves stood in the doorway, the red strobe pulsing against his face, illuminating the suicide bomber mannequin grinning at him from the corner. Ilara exhaled, leaning her forehead against her rifle stock. She hadn't been wrong. Graves looked up. Through the mesh of the catwalk, his eyes locked onto hers. Even from this distance, she could feel the heat of his anger. He didn't look like a man who had just been saved from a mistake. He looked like a man who had been humiliated. "Form up on me!" Graves yelled, tearing off his helmet. "Debrief, now!" Ilara climbed down the ladder, her legs heavy. When she reached the ground, the squad was waiting. They weren't looking at the mannequin. They were looking at her. "You clogged the comms," Graves spat, stepping into her space. "We hesitated because you were yapping about wires." "I told you the door was rigged," Ilara said, holding her ground. "You opened it anyway." "In the real world, hesitation gets people killed, Vance," Graves shouted, a vein throbbing in his temple. "You don't override the breach leader unless you have eyes on the trigger man. You guessed." "I didn't guess," she said quietly. "I saw it. You just didn't want to listen." The silence that followed was heavy and dangerous. Miller looked at Graves, then at Ilara, shifting uncomfortably. They all knew the truth. She had made the right call, and Graves had walked them into a grave because he refused to trust the kid. "Reset," Graves growled, turning away. "And Vance? Keep your mouth shut unless you see a gun pointed at my head. Understood?" "Hoo-yah, Master Chief." Ilara checked her magazine. She understood perfectly. Being right didn't matter. Survival mattered. And in this team, she was surviving alone. By 1300 hours, the Nevada desert had ceased to be a landscape and had become a hostile entity. The air temperature hovered at 112 degrees, but the ground temperature on the salt flats pushed 140. Heat waves radiated off the earth in thick, oily ribbons, distorting everything beyond 400 meters into a soup of shimmering nonsense. This was the grinder. "Shooters, stand by!" The range officer's voice boomed over the loudspeaker, distorted by the heat. "Phase 2, moving targets, unknown distance, random intervals. You have 5 exposures. Engage on sight." Miller was on the gun first. The SEAL sniper lay prone, sweat soaking through his combat shirt. His spotter, a burly operator named Davis, was glued to the spectroscope. "Target, 11 o'clock. Range, 850, Davis barked. Miller adjusted his turret. Crack. "Miss, just off the left shoulder," Davis corrected. "Wind switched. Hold right, .4. Crack. Hit, low left. Target down." Miller wiped sweat from his eyes. He had hit 2 out of 5. The mirage was wreaking havoc on their optics, making the targets appear to dance and float. The robotic mannequins, mounted on erratic rail systems, moved at a sprinting pace, changing direction instantly. It was a nightmare for ballistics. The time of flight for the bullet at that distance was over a second. By the time the round arrived, the target was gone. "Vance, you're up," Graves said, marking Miller's score on a clipboard with a heavy stroke. "Don't embarrass me." Ilara moved to the mat. The heat radiating from the ground felt like a physical blow to the chest. She settled behind the Macmillan, pulling the stock tight into the pocket of her shoulder. She didn't adjust the cheek weld. It was already molded to her bone structure. She looked through the scope. The world was swimming. The targets looked like puddles of water standing up. "I'll spot for you," Graves said, dropping down beside her. It wasn't an act of kindness. He wanted to be the one to call her miss. "Target, 12 o'clock, moving left to right," Graves called out. "Range 900. Ilara saw the robot sprint from behind a berm. It was fast. Too fast for dial-ups. If she listened to Graves, she would miss. He was calling the range based on the laser, but the laser didn't account for the lag. She didn't touch her turrets. She didn't dial for elevation. She used the reticle, the grid of Christmas tree dots etched into the glass. She held over for the drop. She held right for the wind. Then she pushed the crosshair further ahead of the target, leading it into empty space. Time of flight: 1.4 seconds. Spin drift pulling the bullet right. Wind pushing left. She didn't think these words. She felt them. The math dissolved into geometry. The world narrowed down to a single tunnel of focus. Her heart rate dropped, the background noise of the range fading into a dull hum. She wasn't Ilara Vance, 17-year-old girl. She was the firing pin. She was the rifling. Crack. She cycled the bolt before the sound of the impact returned. Her hand was a blur of motion. Unlock, pull, push, lock, clang, headshot. "Target 2, right side," Graves shouted, surprised. She didn't wait for his range call. She swung the rifle, trapping the moving target in her scope. It zigzagged. She waited for the microsecond it paused to change direction. Crack, clang. "Target 3!" She was in the flow now. The rhythm took over. Recoil, cycle, acquire, send. The rifle became a part of her anatomy, an extension of her will. She wasn't fighting the recoil, she was riding it. The heat, the thirst, the exhaustion, it all vanished. There was only the target and the trigger. She fired the 5th round. The target was moving away, presenting a slim profile at 1,200 meters, a nearly impossible shot in these conditions. The rifle barked. She held the follow-through, watching the trace cut through the boiling air. Ping. The steel plate on the robot's head spun violently, catching the sun. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" the range officer yelled. "Range is cold!" Silence slammed back down onto the salt flat. The ringing in Ilara's ears was high and thin. She exhaled, a long, shuddering breath, and the world came rushing back. The heat, the sweat, the smell of cordite. She rolled away from the rifle and sat up. Graves was still looking through the spotting scope. He stayed there for a long time, staring at the 5 downed targets, 3 of them with fresh lead spatters directly in the tee box of the face. Miller and the other SEALs were standing behind them. Nobody was laughing. Nobody was making jokes about Girl Scouts. They looked at the targets, then at the small, dusty girl wiping grease from her cheek. "Score?" Miller asked, his voice subdued. Graves stood up slowly. He dusted off his knees. He looked at Ilara, his eyes narrowed, searching for a trick, for a flaw, for anything that would explain away what he had just seen. 5 for 5, Graves said, his voice devoid of emotion. 3 confirmed kills, 2 incapacitations. Miller looked at his own scorecard. 1 kill, 1 hit, 3 misses. "She tripled you, Miller," another operator whispered. "Beginner's luck," Miller muttered. But there was no conviction in it. He looked at Ilara with a new expression. It wasn't respect yet. It was fear. The fear of being replaced. "Pack it up," Graves ordered sharply, breaking the tension. "We have a night movement to the extraction grid. Don't think this means you've made the team, Vance. Paper targets don't shoot back." Ilara stood up, slinging the heavy rifle. Her shoulder throbbed, where the buttstock had kicked her. A deep, bruising ache. She didn't care. She felt the weight of their eyes on her back as she walked to the truck. They weren't jeering anymore. They were silent. And the silence was louder than the gunfire. The world under quad-tube night vision goggles was a hallucination of green phosphor and grain. Depth perception vanished, replaced by a 2-dimensional tunnel where rocks looked like holes and holes looked like shadows. Ilara moved on the left flank of the wedge formation, her boots silent on the cooling sand. The temperature had plummeted 40 degrees since sunset, and the sweat dried into a crust of salt on her skin. She kept her head on a swivel, the weight of the PVS-31 goggles pulling on her neck muscles. "Control, this is Viking Actual. We are passing phase line Delta," Graves's voice whispered in her earpiece, magnified by the electronic noise reduction. "No contact. Continuing to objective." Ilara adjusted the gain on her thermal clip-on sight mounted in front of her scope. The device overlaid a heat map onto the green image. The desert was mostly cool blues and grays, with the occasional white-hot spark of a rodent or a lingering rock retaining the day's heat. She swept her rifle toward the ridgeline to the north, a jagged spine of rock overlooking their intended path through the wadi. Something flickered. It was faint, a ghost of white against the gray stone, a heat signature. Ilara stopped, taking a knee. The rest of the squad continued moving, their IR strobes pulsing rhythmically on her display, marking them as friendlies. 2-1, why are you halted?" Miller hissed over the squad comms. "Keep the spacing." "Hold," Ilara whispered. She focused her optic, dialing up the magnification. The white smudge resolved into 3 distinct shapes. They were prone, tucked into the crevices of the ridge. They weren't moving like the training robots. Robots were jerky, mechanical. These shapes shifted with the fluidity of breathing organisms. "Actual, this is 2-1. I have thermal contact. North Ridge. 3 packs. Stationary," Ilara reported. "Negative 2-1, Graves replied instantly. "Range control confirmed the box is sterile. We are the only unit in this grid. You're seeing goats." "Too large for goats, Master Chief. Heat signature suggests human body mass. They are in a defilade position, observing us." "We are 5 clicks from the nearest public highway, Vance." Graves sounded tired. "It's probably a sensor blooming effect from the heat retention in the rocks. Reset your gain and get back in formation. We are burning time." Ilara didn't move. She trusted the machine. She trusted her eyes. She adjusted the focus ring, straining against the grain of the image. The figure on the left shifted. An arm came up. It wasn't scratching a head or adjusting a pack. It was bringing something to the shoulder. A long, thin line protruded from the heat blob, a barrel. "Master Chief, I have a weapon profile," Ilara said, her voice tightening. "It's not a standard OP-4 silhouette." "Vance, if you call a halt for a rock one more time, I'm pulling your comms," Graves snapped. "There is no OP-4 in this sector. The scenario doesn't start until we hit the village. Move your ass." The order was absolute. To disobey was to fail the trial. To disobey was to prove she was a paranoid child who saw monsters in the dark. Ilara hesitated. She watched the heat signatures for one more second. They were tracking the squad. They were waiting. Reluctantly, she stood up. She forced her legs to move, jogging to catch up with the dark shapes of the seals ahead of her. But she didn't look forward. She kept her rifle trained on the ridge, walking sideways, her heart hammering against her ribs. If they are training partners, why aren't they squawking on IFF, she thought. Why are they cold on the radio? "Miller," she whispered on the secondary channel, bypassing Graves. "Check your 6, high ground, north." "I see 'em, kid," Miller replied softly. "Probably range safety officers grading the stock. Relax. Don't let Graves get in your head." Range safety officers wore high-vis vests and drove white trucks. They didn't crawl on their bellies in the middle of the night. Ilara kept her eye on the scope. The ridge was slipping away as they descended into the dry riverbed. The wash. It was a perfect fatal funnel. High walls, loose footing, zero cover. As the last seal entered the depression, Ilara saw the heat signature on the ridge flare. The figure stood up. In the monochromatic green glow of her intensified vision, she saw the distinct curved profile of the magazine extending from the weapon. It wasn't the straight magazine of an M4 or the boxy shape of a saw used by U.S. forces. It was a banana curve. Kalashnikov. "Contact rear!" Ilara screamed, breaking radio protocol, breaking the silence, breaking the night. Before anyone could reprimand her, the ridge erupted. But it wasn't the pop, pop, pop of blank rounds. It was the terrifying, cracking snap of supersonic lead tearing through the air. A tracer round, burning angry red, streaked over her head and slammed into the dirt at Graves's feet. This wasn't a test. The air didn't just vibrate, it tore apart. "Contact rear!" Ilara's scream was swallowed by the deafening rattle of automatic fire. Crack, crack, crack. The sound was unmistakable to anyone who had heard it before, but for a split second, the training mindset held the SEALs in a fatal pause. In a simulation, a kill was a beep from a vest or a puff of blue chalk. But these sounds were sharp, whipping snaps that broke the sound barrier inches above their heads, followed milliseconds later by the dull, heavy thump of the muzzle reports echoing off the canyon walls. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" Graves roared, diving behind a cluster of limestone boulders. He keyed his radio, his voice furious. "Control, this is Viking. Unsafe act. Op 4 is firing too close. Check fire." Dirt sprayed into Ilara's face as a bullet impacted the ground 6 inches from her left hand. It didn't poof into blue dust. It kicked up shrapnel of rock and lead. "It's live! Take cover!" Ilara shouted, rolling into the depression of the dried stream bed. She scrambled on her elbows, dragging the heavy rifle case through the sand. "Davis, get down!" Miller yelled. Davis, the heavy weapons operator, was still standing, confused, trying to locate the source of the violation. He turned toward the ridge, raising his MK-46 machine gun. A single shot rang out, louder than the others. A Dragunov. Davis's leg kicked out from under him as if he'd been tackled by a ghost. He crumpled to the sand, a guttural scream tearing from his throat. "I'm hit! I'm hit!" Graves low-crawled to him, grabbing the drag handle of Davis's vest. "Medic! Get on him!" Ilara watched from her position 10 meters away. In the green wash of her NVGs, the dark stain spreading on Davis's thigh looked like black oil. Graves ripped open the pant leg. It wasn't a welt from a sim round. It was a jagged, tearing wound where a 7.62 mm round had punched through muscle and bone. The reality hit the platoon like a physical blow. The game was over. Real world, Graves screamed into the comms, the code phrase to suspend all training instantly. "Viking is taking effective fire. We have a casualty. Live rounds. I repeat, live rounds." "Viking, this is Control," the radio crackled back, sounding distant and confused. "Say again? We show no units in your sector." "They are shooting at us, damn it!" Graves returned fire, squeezing the trigger of his HK-416. Pop, pop, pop! The sound was pathetic. The simulation rounds, plastic caps filled with colored soap, burst harmlessly against the rocks of the ridge 200 meters away. The range of the sim rounds was 50 meters effective. The enemy was engaging from 300. The SEALs were bringing knives to a gunfight. "Suppressive fire!" Miller yelled, unloading his magazine at the muzzle flashes on the ridge. "Keep their heads down!" It was futile. The enemy realized quickly that the return fire was non-lethal. The volume of incoming fire increased. Rounds began to chew up the cover, pinning them deep into the wadi. The ridgeline gave the attackers a plunging angle. They could shoot down into the SEALs' positions. Ilara pressed herself flat against the earth. The smell of ozone and copper filled her nose. She looked at her rifle, the Macmillan TAC 338. It was the only weapon in the squad capable of reaching the ridge, and because she was testing the long-range ballistics, she was the only one carrying live match-grade ammunition. "Chief!" Ilara yelled over the roar of a PKM machine gun opening up from the flank. "My rifle! I have live ammo!" Graves looked at her, his face streaked with dust and sweat. His eyes were wide, the pupils dilated. He looked at Davis, who was groaning as the medic applied a tourniquet. Then he looked at the useless blue paint splatters on the rocks above. "Are you sure?" Graves shouted back. "2 magazines, 20 rounds of Lapua Magnum." Ilara patted the pouch on her vest. "Miller, smoke," Graves ordered. "Vance, get to the high rock. We need to shut that gun down or we're going to get flanked." Miller popped 2 smoke grenades. Thick white clouds billowed out, obscuring the NVGs, turning the green world into a wall of static. "Move! Move!" Ilara scrambled up. She didn't feel the weight of the pack anymore. She didn't feel the fatigue. She ran, crouched low, diving toward a slab of granite that offered a view of the ridge. Bullets zipped through the smoke, snapping blindly. She slammed her body against the rock, deploying the bipod legs of the Macmillan. She reached into her vest and pulled out the magazine. It was heavy, real, lethal. She stripped the training magazine from the rifle and locked the live rounds into the mag well. The bolt slid forward with a heavy metallic clack, chambering a 250-grain projectile. "2-1 is hot," she whispered into her mic. She pressed her eye to the scope. The thermal overlay cut through the smoke. She saw the heat signature of the machine gunner on the ridge. He was prone, the barrel of his weapon glowing white-hot from sustained fire. "Clear backblast!" she yelled, though no one was behind her. Ilara took a breath. This wasn't a steel plate. This wasn't a robot. This was a man who was currently trying to kill Master Chief Graves. She centered the crosshair on the glowing white blob of the gunner's chest. Rule number 4. Know your target and what lies beyond it. Rule number 1. Survive. She exhaled. The world paused. Crack. The recoil of the 338 was violent, a mule kick compared to the sim rounds the others were firing. The muzzle flash illuminated the smoke for a fraction of a second. Up on the ridge, the machine gun fire stopped abruptly. "Target down!" Miller shouted from his position. "Holy shit, she got him!" But the silence didn't last. A rocket-propelled grenade hissed from the darkness to the left, trailing a tail of sparks. Whoosh! "RPG!" Graves screamed. The explosion slammed into the canyon wall 10 meters above them, raining jagged rocks down on their position. The ambush wasn't over. It was just getting started. The dust from the RPG impact tasted of sulfur and crushed stone. It hung in the air, a choking gray curtain that momentarily blinded the night vision devices. "Sound off!" Graves coughed, his voice ragged. "Miller up! Sanchez up! Davis! Davis is conscious, bleeding controlled." Ilara wiped the dust from her objective lens. The explosion had collapsed part of the wadi wall, creating a temporary berm, but it wouldn't hold. The enemy knew exactly where they were. And worse, the enemy knew the SEALs couldn't touch them. The attackers were maneuvering with impunity, walking upright along the ridgeline, closing the angle to drop grenades directly into their laps. "Chief, they're flanking east!" Miller shouted, firing a burst of useless blue paint at a shadow moving 300 meters out. My rounds are dropping at 50 yards. I can't touch them. Graves looked at the tactical situation. It was a kill box. If they stayed in the depression, they died. If they retreated down the open wash, they would be cut down from behind. Ilara looked up. To her right, about 50 meters away and 30 meters up, was a jagged spur of rock, a sniper's hide carved by wind and time. It commanded a view of the entire ridgeline. But to get there, she had to cross a stretch of open scree that was currently being chewed up by automatic fire. I need elevation, Ilara said, grabbing Graves's shoulder to get his attention. I can't get a line of sight on the RPG team from down here. The angle is too steep. Graves looked at the spur, then at the open ground. He shook his head. Negative. You'll be cut to ribbons before you make halfway. Stay close. If I stay, we all die, Ilara said. It wasn't an argument. It was a ballistic fact. You have no range. I am the only asset you have. Graves stared at her. The blue veins in his neck were bulging. He hated this. He hated that his survival depended on a 17-year-old girl running a suicide sprint. But he was a pragmatist. Miller! Sanchez! Graves barked. Dump your mags! Everything you have on that ridge! Make them blink! Vance is moving! Moving, Ilara echoed. Covering fire. The SEALs rose up in unison. 4 carbines erupted on full auto. The sound was a frantic pop, 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 like a string of firecrackers. It was pathetic compared to the thump crack of the enemy AKs, but the sheer volume of plastic projectiles hitting the rocks above momentarily confused the attackers. Ilara launched herself from the cover. She didn't run. She scrambled on all fours, a spider moving across broken glass. The scree shifted under her boots, sliding and rattling. Snap, snap, zing. The enemy recovered quickly. Bullets began to dance around her. A round struck a rock inches from her face, sending stone shards into her cheek. She didn't flinch. Flinching took time. She dug her fingers into the dirt, pulling herself forward, lungs burning. Keep moving! Don't stop! Graves screamed from the pit, his voice cracking. 30 meters. Her breath came in ragged gasps. The weight of the Macmillan rifle was a lead anchor on her back. 20 meters. The ground steepened. She grabbed a root and hauled herself up, her boots slipping on the loose shale. A bullet tugged at her pant leg, searing the skin of her calf, a graze, hot and stinging. 10 meters. She threw herself over the lip of the spur and rolled into a shallow depression behind a slab of granite. 2-1 in position, she gasped into the radio, checking her limbs. Blood on her leg, but the muscle worked. She was whole. Set up, Graves ordered. Ilara dragged the rifle around. From this height, the battlefield opened up like a map. She could see the wadi below, where the SEALs were huddled like trapped rats, and she could see the enemy. There were 6 of them visible now. They were moving aggressively, sensing blood. 2 of them were setting up another RPG launcher on a flat rock, ready to fire a finishing shot into the wadi. Ilara deployed the bipod. She settled the stock into her shoulder. The isolation hit her then. She was 50 meters away from the nearest human being who wanted her alive. Up here, in the wind and the dark, she was completely alone. There was no one to check her math, no one to hand her ammo, no one to tell her it would be okay. She was the guardian. She was the monster on the hill. I have the RPG team, Ilara whispered, her heart rate forcibly slowing down as she peered through the thermal scope. Stand by. She dialed the elevation. The wind up here was stronger, cutting across the canyon. She felt it on her wet skin. She didn't need the kestrel. She felt the pressure. She loaded the chamber. The brass cartridge felt cold and heavy. It was the weight of responsibility. Below her, the SEALs stopped firing. They were out of ammo or conserving what little they had left. They were waiting for the sound, the only sound that mattered. Ilara exhaled. The world narrowed to a crosshair and a beating heart. She was no longer a trainee. She was the Overwatch. And the lesson was about to begin. The crosshair settled on the chest of the RPG gunner. Through the thermal optic, he was a glowing white phantom against the cooling gray rock. He was kneeling, adjusting the warhead on the launcher, his movements calm and practiced. Ilara's finger rested on the trigger guard. The pressure required to send the round was 3 pounds. The pressure of the decision weighed a lifetime. "Command, this is Vulture 2-1. Ilara spoke, her voice cutting through the static with terrifying clarity. "I have PID on 2 armed combatants, North Ridge. They are prepping an RPG-7, requesting permission to engage. Live fire. I repeat, live fire." There was a pause. A silence that stretched for an eternity while the enemy gunner lifted the tube to his shoulder. "Vulture 2-1, this is Darkstar." The voice from the Joint Operations Center came back, calm, detached, and utterly wrong. "Negative on live fire. You are in a training environment. Those are role players. Do not engage. I repeat, strict weapons hold." "Darkstar, they are firing live ammunition." Graves broke in, his voice distorted by the sound of incoming rounds impacting the rocks around him. "We have a casualty. This is not a drill. Clear us hot." "Viking actual, stand by," the controller replied, the rustle of papers audible in the background. "We show no unauthorized personnel in the box. Range safety indicates all sectors are green. You are likely experiencing a pyrotechnic malfunction. Cease fire and hold position." Ilara watched the RPG gunner aim. The tube was pointed downward, directly into the wadi where Graves and the others were trapped. "They are not role players," Ilara screamed, abandoning protocol. "If he fires that rocket, everyone in the wash dies. I have the shot. Clear me hot." 2-1, listen to me." The controller's voice turned icy. "If you discharge a live weapon in a training zone, you will be subject to immediate court-martial. You are a trainee. You do not make that call. Stand down. That is a direct order." The logic of the bureaucracy was a cold, iron wall. To them, Ilara was a 17-year-old girl in a high-stress simulation who was panicking. To them, the live fire was just part of the immersion. They couldn't see the blood on Davis's leg. They couldn't feel the heat of the tracer rounds. Down in the wadi, the enemy machine gun opened up again, pinning the SEALs. The RPG gunner stabilized his aim. He was going to fire in 3 seconds, maybe 2. "Vance!" Graves's voice tore through the earpiece, desperate and raw. "Take the shot! Forget command! Take the damn shot! Darkstar to 2-1, do not fire! I repeat, weapons hold! Acknowledge!" Ilara closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. The rules of engagement were clear. You do not fire unless authorized. You do not fire unless you are certain. You do not disobey a direct order from a superior officer. But there was an older rule. A rule written not in manuals, but in the DNA of every person who had ever stood between the wolf and the flock. If you don't act, the blood is on your hands. If she pulled the trigger, she was a criminal. She would be stripped of her rank, thrown in Leavenworth, branded a murderer if the investigation went sideways. If she didn't pull the trigger, Graves, Miller, Sanchez, and Davis would be pink mist on the canyon floor. 2-1, acknowledge, Darkstar demanded. Ilara opened her eyes. The world slowed down. The wind read 3 miles per hour from the left. Elevation was dialed. The target was exhaling. She reached up to her headset. Her hand was steady. She found the volume knob on the comms unit. "I can't hear you," she whispered to the empty air. She clicked the radio off. The screaming voice of the controller vanished. The desperate pleas of Graves vanished. There was only the silence of the desert and the heavy thrum of her own pulse. She was alone, truly alone. No orders, no permission. Just a girl, a rifle, and a decision that could not be undone. She slid her finger onto the trigger, taking up the slack. The seer engaged. The wall was there. The RPG gunner's finger tightened on his trigger. Ilara didn't hesitate. She didn't think about the prison cell. She didn't think about the court-martial. She thought about the empty seat at the breakfast table if Graves didn't come home. She broke the glass. Crack. The rifle bucked violently, the muzzle blast kicking up a cloud of dust from the ridge. The sound rolled out across the valley, a thunderclap that silenced the night. Through the scope, she watched the flight of the bullet. It was a perfect arc of judgment. The RPG gunner's head snapped back in a spray of heat. The launcher slipped from his shoulder, pointing skyward as his muscles spasmed. Whoosh! The rocket fired, but the aim was ruined. The projectile streaked harmlessly into the night sky, detonating against the canyon wall 200 feet above the seals. "Target down," Ilara whispered to herself in the ringing silence. She cycled the bolt. The empty brass casing hit the rock with a bright ching. She slammed the bolt forward, chambering the next round. The radio was dead silent because she had killed it. But the war wasn't over. The second man on the ridge was scrambling for the fallen RPG launcher. Ilara didn't wait for permission she knew would never come. She shifted her aim. The line was crossed. There was no going back now. The RPG gunner was dead, but the machine gun was still screaming. 200 meters to the left of the fallen rocket team, the PKM gunner was pouring hate into the wadi. The muzzle flash was a frantic strobe light in the darkness, a relentless rhythm of suppression that kept Graves and his men face down in the dirt. Every time a SEAL tried to raise a head to return fire, the rocks around them disintegrated under the impact of 7.54mm rounds. Ilara cycled the bolt. The action was stiff with dust, but she forced it back and forward with a palm strike, locking the lug into place. Target prioritization. The RPG is down. The loader is scrambling. The machine gun is the anchor. She shifted her hips, dragging the heavy barrel of the Macmillan to the left. The bipod legs scraped against the granite, a sound that felt loud enough to wake the dead, but was swallowed by the cacophony of the firefight. Through the thermal scope, the machine gunner was a glowing demon. The barrel of his weapon was white-hot, radiating heat that bloomed on the display. He was dug in deep behind a pile of shale, exposing only his head and the weapon itself. Range 820, Ilara whispered, her lips brushing the microphone she had silenced. It was a difficult shot. The target was small, a grapefruit-sized heat signature bobbing with the recoil of the gun. She checked her level. The bubble was centered. She checked her breath. She was hyperventilating. The adrenaline was a chemical flood, making her hands tremble. "Stop it," she commanded her nervous system. "You are a platform. You are stone," she exhaled, emptying her lungs until she hit the respiratory pause. The tremor in the crosshair smoothed out. The reticle settled on the heat signature of the gunner's face. Just behind the glowing receiver of the PKM, she applied pressure. 1 pound. 2 pounds. The machine gunner paused to reload. He sat up slightly, reaching for a fresh belt. Now! Crack! The rifle kicked her hard, the buttstock slamming into the pocket of her shoulder with the force of a sledgehammer. Dust jumped from the rock in front of her muzzle. Ilara didn't blink. She held the trigger back, pinning it to the rear, keeping her eye glued to the scope to spot the impact. The flight time was over a second. A lifetime of silence in the middle of a war. She saw the trace, a disturbance in the air, like a boat wake on a calm lake, arcing down toward the ridge. The bullet struck. In a video game, bodies fly backward. In movies, they scream. In the thermal scope, it was just a physics equation resolving itself. The heat signature of the gunner's head simply exploded. A spray of warm fluid, blood and brain matter erupted backward, painting the cold rocks with a splash of heat that looked like spilled ink on the display. The gunner didn't flinch. He just collapsed. Like a marionette with the strings cut, he folded forward over the weapon, his body going limp instantly. The machine gun fell silent. The sudden absence of noise was more shocking than the gunfire. The valley, which had been tearing itself apart seconds ago, was now filled with a ringing, hollow quiet. Ilara gasped, sucking in air. Her stomach lurched. The reality of what she had done hit her with the force of the recoil. That wasn't a steel plate. That wasn't a robot. That was a human being. A man who had been alive 2 seconds ago was now just a cooling lump of meat because her finger had moved 3 millimeters. She wanted to retch. She wanted to throw the rifle off the cliff. Movement. On the right, near the first body, the loader. The man who had been with the RPG gunner. He had recovered from the shock of seeing his partner die. He was crawling toward the fallen launcher. He was picking it up. The sickness vanished. The cold logic returned. If he picks up that tube, he kills the team. Ilara cycled the bolt again. The ejected casing spun into the dark. She swung the rifle back to the right. The loader was fumbling with the RPG, trying to align it. He was panicked, his movements jerky. "Don't do it," Ilara whispered, her eye tearing up from the strain. "Just run away. Please run away." He didn't run. He hoisted the launcher to his shoulder. Ilara didn't hesitate this time. There was no math to do. The range was the same. The wind was the same. Crack. The round took him in the center of the chest. The energy of the 338 Lapua Magnum, designed to disable engine blocks at a mile, hit him with devastating force. He was lifted off his feet and thrown backward into the darkness. The RPG tube clattered onto the rocks. Useless. Ilara lowered her head, resting her forehead against the cold metal of the scope ring. "Target down," she croaked. Down in the wadi, the seals were slowly lifting their heads. They looked up at the ridge, toward the sound of the thunder that had saved them. They couldn't see her. They could only hear the echo of the heavy rifle rolling through the canyons. "Command." Graves' voice came over the radio, faint, as if he was afraid to break the silence. "Command. Viking actual. We have targets neutral. Enemy fire has ceased." There was no response from Darkstar. They were likely still scrambling to understand why a trainee had just executed 2 people on a training range. Ilara reached up and clicked her radio back on. The static hissed in her ear. "Vulture 2-1, Graves said, his voice different now. It lacked the edge of command. It was filled with a bewildered awe. 2-1, report status." Ilara wiped her mouth with the back of her glove. She stared at the cooling heat signatures on the ridge. "I am Winchester on targets, Master Chief," she said, her voice hollow. "The ridge is clear." "Copy," Graves whispered. "Good shooting, kid. Goddamn good shooting." Ilara didn't answer. She pulled the bolt back and left the chamber open. She watched the steam rise from the barrel, drifting up toward the stars. She had won the fight. But as the adrenaline faded, the shaking began, and this time, she couldn't make it stop. The silence was a lie. It was the deep breath before the scream. Ilara knew the doctrine: shoot twice, move once. She had fired 3 times from the same position. To a trained enemy, her location was no longer a mystery. It was a grid coordinate. "Incoming!" she hissed to herself, not waiting for the sound. She grabbed the drag handle of her rifle case and threw herself backward, rolling away from the lip of the spur. She didn't stand up. She scrambled on her hands and knees, dragging the heavy weapon through the sharp scree, her movements fueled by pure, reptilian panic. Thump, the sound of a mortar launching from the valley floor, a 60-millimeter tube. Flight time, roughly 12 seconds. She counted down in her head as she crawled into a fissure between 2 massive boulders, curling into a ball. 5, 4, 3, boom! The world turned white. The mortar round impacted the exact spot where she had been lying 10 seconds ago. The concussion wave slapped against the rocks, dislodging a cascade of shale that rained down on her helmet. The ground heaved, and the smell of high explosives, sharp, acrid tasting of burnt copper, filled her lungs. "Check fire! Check fire!" Graves was shouting on the radio, but he was yelling at ghosts. The enemy wasn't checking fire. They were bracketing the ridge. Another round impacted 20 meters to her right, then another to her left. They were walking the rounds across the high ground, searching for the sniper with high explosives. Ilara checked her optic. The glass was dusty but unbroken. She checked her limbs. Still attached. Displace. She couldn't stay here. She had to move to the secondary position, a lower outcrop 50 meters to the east. It offered less cover but a wider field of view. She waited for the next explosion, timing her movement with the chaos. Boom. She ran. She stayed low, her silhouette broken by the rocks. The air was thick with dust, which was good. It masked her thermal signature. She slid into the new position, ignoring the fresh cuts on her hands. She deployed the bipod on a flat rock, pushing the muzzle through a gap in the sagebrush. Below, the enemy was moving again. They thought they had suppressed the sniper. Emboldened by the mortar barrage, 4 fighters were sprinting across the open ground, trying to flank the wadi where the SEALs were pinned. "They're moving on your right, Chief," Ilara whispered, her voice steady now. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, mechanical focus. "I have them." She settled behind the scope. The thermal image showed them clearly, 4 white shapes moving fast. If she fired now, they would pinpoint her new position immediately. She looked at the canyon wall opposite her. It was a sheer cliff face of concave granite. Acoustic reflection. Bank the shot. She shifted her aim to the lead runner. He was carrying a light machine gun. Ilara didn't fire directly at him. She waited until he passed a large rock formation that would baffle the sound. Crack! The rifle roared. The sound wave slammed into the opposite canyon wall and bounced back, creating an echo that sounded like it came from the west, not the east. The lead runner crumpled, his legs shattered by the heavy round. He went down, screaming. The other 3 fighters immediately turned west, firing blindly into the empty darkness, suppressed by a ghost. "Wrong way," Ilara murmured. She cycled the bolt. Clack, clack. She took the second man. Center mass. He dropped without a sound. The remaining 2 froze. They were confused. Their comrade had fallen, but they couldn't see the muzzle flash. The sound was coming from everywhere and nowhere. Panic set in. They broke formation, scrambling for cover that didn't exist. Ilara took a breath. The rhythm was back. Crack. The third man spun around, hit in the shoulder. He fell, crawling desperately toward a ditch. The fourth man realized the game was rigged. He didn't try to fight. He threw his weapon down and sprinted back toward the ridgeline, abandoning his squad. Ilara tracked him. The crosshair hovered over his retreating back. "Let him go," a voice in her head whispered. "He's running. If he escapes, he regroups. He comes back with more men. He kills Graves." She hardened her heart. She led the target. Crack. The runner pitched forward, sliding face first into the dirt. He didn't get up. Ilara pulled the rifle back into the shadows immediately. She didn't wait to admire her work. She rolled onto her back, clutching the weapon to her chest, staring up at the stars through the drifting smoke. "Splash 4, she reported, her voice devoid of inflection. "Flank is broken." Down in the wadi, the silence returned. It was heavier this time. The enemy knew there was something up on that ridge. Something that didn't miss. Something that moved like a spirit and hit like a hammer. 2-1. Graves' voice was a whisper of disbelief. "Did you just wipe the squad?" "I am displacing," Ilara replied, ignoring the question. "They know where I am. Moving to position, Charlie." She stood up, her knees shaking violently, and began to run again. The hunt wasn't over. It had just evolved. Viking actual to 2-1. "We are moving. Give us steel." The voice in Ilara's earpiece was wet and ragged. Master Chief Graves wasn't shouting anymore. He was gasping. From her new vantage point at position Charlie, a jagged outcrop of limestone 300 meters parallel to the wadi, Ilara watched the thermal signatures of the team. They were slow, painfully slow. 4 men were clustered together, dragging the litter where Davis lay. They were a single, heavy, glowing mass in the center of the kill zone. "Moving," Ilara whispered. "I have you covered." She didn't look at the team. She looked past them, scanning the darkness ahead of their path. The enemy, realizing the American unit was attempting to break contact, was surging. 2 heat signatures popped up from behind a ridgeline directly in front of the SEAL's escape route. They were setting up an ambush point, less than 50 meters from where Graves was leading the drag. "Contact front, 50 meters, Ilara warned. "We can't stop," Graves yelled back. "We have to push through. Davis is crashing." They couldn't stop, and they couldn't shoot effectively while carrying the litter. Ilara adjusted her elevation. The range was short, 400 meters. The angle was steep. If she missed low, she would hit the lead man. If she missed high, the ambushers would cut the team down. She didn't feel the fear anymore. The fear had burned away, leaving only a cold, crystalline focus. "Don't miss." She fired. Crack! The bullet passed 2 feet over Graves's head. The sonic boom of the projectile snapped the air like a bullwhip. Graves flinched, instinctively ducking, but the round found its mark. The lead ambusher on the ridge crumpled, his chest cavity expanded by the hydraulic shock of the 338 bullet. "Keep moving," Ilara commanded, her voice overriding the rank structure. "Don't duck. I won't hit you." Graves looked up. He saw the enemy soldier fall. He heard the thump of Ilara's rifle echoing from the darkness on his flank. It wasn't the erratic fire of a panicked trainee. It was the rhythmic, metronomic hammer of a professional. Crack. The second ambusher dropped. "Clear front," Ilara called. "Push right. Head for the LZ." The SEALs surged forward, their boots slipping in the loose sand. But the enemy was relentless. A new group of fighters appeared on the rear flank, chasing the retreating unit. They opened fire with AK-47s, the green tracer rounds stitching the ground around the SEAL's boots. Graves grunted and stumbled. A round had skipped off the ground and slammed into his shin guard, or maybe through the meat of his calf. He went down to one knee, the litter slipping from his grip. "Chief is down!" Miller screamed, firing his carbine one-handed while trying to hold up Davis's stretcher. The enemy saw the stumble. They accelerated, sensing weakness. They were closing the distance. 70 meters, 60. Ilara saw it happening in slow motion. The wolves were closing in on the wounded lion. She didn't have a clear shot at the rear attackers because of the rocks. She had to thread the needle. She had to shoot through a gap in the terrain, past her own team, to hit the pursuers. "Danger close," she whispered. She shifted her aim. The crosshair hovered inches to the left of Miller's helmet. "Trust the math." She pulled the trigger. The rifle bucked. The bullet screamed past Miller's ear, so close the shockwave likely ruptured his eardrum. It struck the chest of the enemy fighter, sprinting directly behind him. The man was lifted off his feet and thrown backward. Miller spun around, eyes wide, looking for the source of the shot that had nearly taken his head off. He saw the dead enemy. He looked up at the black ridge where Ilara was hidden. "She's parting the Red Sea for us," Miller breathed. Graves hauled himself up, ignoring the blood running down his boot. He grabbed the litter handle again. He looked at the ridge. For 3 days, he had mocked her size. He had mocked her age. He had called her a liability. Now, every time that rifle cracked, he was allowed to take another breath. "Go, go, go!" Graves roared, fueled by a mixture of pain and adrenaline. They reached the flat ground of the landing zone. In the distance, the thumping beat of rotor blades cut through the night air. The QRF, Quick Reaction Force birds, were inbound. "Viking to 2-1, Graves gasped, collapsing near the signal marker. "We are at the LZ. Birds are 2 minutes out. Get down here. We aren't leaving you." Ilara watched them through the scope. They were safe. They had made the circle. But her thermal scan picked up movement to the north. A pickup truck with a mounted heavy machine gun, was navigating the rocks, trying to get a line of sight on the landing zone. If it crested the ridge while the helicopter was landing, it would shred the bird. If she ran down to the LZ now, the gun truck would have a free shot. "Negative, Master Chief," Ilara said softly. "You have a technical moving on your north flank. I have to hold them until the bird lifts." "Vance, don't be a hero," Graves shouted, his voice cracking. "Get your ass down here. That's an order." Ilara cycled the bolt. She watched the truck bouncing over the terrain. It was heavy. It was armored. Her rifle was the only thing that could stop it. "I can't follow that order, sir," she said. She settled the crosshair on the driver's slit of the approaching vehicle. "I'll see you back at the base." She didn't move. She stayed in the dark, watching the rescue arrive for the men who had jeered her, ready to fight the monster that was coming for them. The chopper lights swept over the valley, blindingly bright, but Ilara stayed in the shadows. She was just 17. But tonight, she was the oldest soul on the battlefield. The technical, a battered pickup truck with a heavy DSHK machine gun mounted in the bed, crested the saddle of the ridge. Its headlights cut through the dark, sweeping toward the landing zone where the MH-60 Blackhawk was flaring for extraction. The helicopter was a sitting duck. The heavy caliber rounds from the technical would tear through the thin aluminum skin of the aircraft, turning the rescue mission into a massacre. Ilara had 1 magazine left. 3 rounds. "Steady," she whispered. The vibration of the truck engine rattled the ground. shaking her scope. She didn't aim for the gunner. Another man would just take his place. She aimed for the heart of the machine. The truck accelerated, the gunner traversing the heavy barrel toward the helo. Ilara led the target. She aimed for the grill, slightly offset to the left, directly into the engine block. Crack. The .338 Lapua Magnum round, a solid, copper penetrator, slammed into the radiator. It punched through the steel, shattering the cylinder head and cracking the block. Steam erupted from the hood in a violent white geyser. The truck lurched, the engine seizing instantly. Momentum carried it forward a few yards before it ground to a halt, dead in the water. Target vehicle mobility kill, Ilara reported, her voice calm despite the fact that every enemy soldier on the ridge was now turning their weapons toward her muzzle flash. Down in the valley, the Black Hawk's wheels lifted off the ground. The rotor wash kicked up a blinding sandstorm. 2-1, we are wheels up, Graves screamed over the radio. We are coming back for you. Do not engage. Go to ground. I repeat, go to ground. Ilara watched the helicopter bank away, disappearing into the night sky. She was alone. Bullets began to snap around her position. The men from the disabled truck had dismounted. They were angry, and they were sprinting toward the spur. Ilara fired her last 2 rounds. One hit a man trying to flank her left. The other went wide. Click. The rifle was empty. She didn't have time to reload. She didn't have the ammo even if she had the time. She rolled onto her back, grabbing the rifle by the barrel, and slid down the backside of the ridge into a narrow fissure. She hit the bottom of the ravine hard, the impact knocking the wind out of her. She scrambled up, abandoning the heavy rifle case, dragging the weapon with her. She drew her sidearm, a standard-issue M9 Beretta. It felt like a toy compared to the rifle. "Find the sniper," a voice shouted in Arabic from the ridge above. "Find him and cut his throat." They were close. Too close. Ilara looked around frantically. The ravine was a dead end. She couldn't outrun them. She had to vanish. To her right, near the base of a mesquite bush, was a small undercut in the canyon wall, a hollowed-out space caused by flash floods. It was tiny. A grown man, especially a SEAL with body armor, wouldn't have fit his leg inside. Ilara was 5'2", 112 pounds. She holstered her pistol and jammed herself backward into the hole. The rocks scraped her back, tearing her uniform. She pulled her knees to her chest, curling into a fetal ball. She grabbed a tumbleweed and pulled it over the opening, pressing herself into the dirt until she was one with the earth. She held her breath. Thump, thump, thump. Boots hit the ground in the ravine. Flashlights swept the walls. "He went this way," a voice growled. "I saw the slide marks." Ilara closed her eyes. Her heart was hammering against her ribs so hard she was terrified they could hear it. Thump, 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 thump. A boot crunched on the gravel directly in front of her hiding spot. She opened her eyes. Just a slit. Through the branches of the tumbleweed, she saw the dusty combat boot. It was inches from her nose. She could smell the leather. She could smell the unwashed sweat of the man standing there. If she were 6 feet tall, her knees would have been sticking out. If she were 200 pounds, she wouldn't have fit. The very thing Graves had mocked, her size, her fragility, was the only thing keeping her alive. The soldier lingered. He swept his flashlight beam over the brush. The light cut through the twigs, illuminating Ilara's eye for a fraction of a second. She didn't blink. She didn't breathe. She became a stone. "Nothing here," the soldier grunted. "Check the south draw." The boot turned. The footsteps crunched away. Ilara let out a breath that was microscopic. Tears stung her eyes, mixing with the dust. She didn't move. She stayed in the spider hole, listening to the hunt move further down the canyon. 10 minutes later, the deep, rhythmic thud-thud-thud of heavy rotors returned. But this wasn't the extraction bird. This was the sound of vengeance. 2 AH-64 Apache gunships roared overhead, their chain guns spinning up. Brrrt! The sound of the 30mm cannons was a continuous tear in the fabric of the night. The enemy on the ridge didn't stand a chance. The gunships turned the desert into a kill zone, hunting the hunters. Ilara stayed in her hole. She waited until the guns went silent. She waited until the dust settled. She waited until she heard the distinct, clipped voice of an American operator on the localized frequency. Vulture 2-1, this is Viking. We are on the ground. Come out, kid. It's over. Ilara pushed the tumbleweed aside. She crawled out of the hole, covered in dirt, bleeding from a dozen cuts, her face a mask of exhaustion. She stood up. Master Chief Graves was standing 10 meters away, illuminated by the searchlight of the hovering helicopter. His leg was bandaged. He was leaning on a crutch improvised from a rifle. He looked at the tiny hole she had crawled out of. He looked at the disabled technical smoking on the ridge. Then he looked at her. He didn't say anything about her age. He didn't say anything about her size. He just raised a hand and saluted. It wasn't a formal salute. It was the salute of a man acknowledging an equal. Ilara didn't return it. She was too tired. She just nodded, picked up her heavy rifle, and began the long walk to the chopper. The room was cold. Not the organic, biting cold of the desert night, but the artificial, sterilized chill of air conditioning set too low. The walls were soundproofed foam, gray and oppressive. The table was stainless steel. Ilara sat on a metal folding chair. Her hands were scrubbed clean of gunpowder and dirt, but the smell of cordite seemed to linger in her pores. She was no longer wearing her combat gear. She was in her dress uniform, skirt, blouse, polished shoes. Without the bulk of the plate carrier and the power of the rifle, she looked exactly what she was. A 17-year-old girl sitting in a room full of men who wanted her gone. Across the table sat a commander from JAG, Judge Advocate General, and a man in a civilian suit who hadn't introduced himself. "Let's go over it again, Private Vance," the commander said, tapping a pen on the thick file in front of him. "You stated that you received a direct order from Darkstar to hold fire. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir," Ilara replied. Her voice was steady, but her knees were trembling beneath the table. "And despite this direct order from a superior officer, you made the conscious decision to disable your communications equipment and engage the targets with lethal force." "The targets were armed combatants engaging a U.S. Navy SEAL team with effective fire, sir. They were not role players." The man in the suit leaned forward. His eyes were dead, like a shark's. "That is a matter of perspective, Private. The official report states that a pyrotechnic malfunction caused a panic on the range. There were no combatants. If we admit there were cartels operating inside a U.S. military testing ground, it becomes a national security incident. Do you understand?" Ilara tightened her jaw. They were gaslighting her. They were rewriting history to cover their own incompetence. "I saw the bodies, sir," Ilara said quietly. "I saw the pink mist. Pyrotechnics don't bleed." "You saw what you wanted to see," the commander snapped. "You are a teenager in a high-stress environment. You panicked. You fired blindly. And now, we have a diplomatic situation to clean up." He slid a piece of paper across the steel table. "This is a confession, Private. It states that you suffered a temporary psychological break due to heat exhaustion and discharged your weapon in error. If you sign it, you will be discharged quietly. Medical separation. No prison, no court-martial. And if I don't sign it? Then we charge you with Article 90, willfully disobeying a superior commissioned officer. You'll go to Leavenworth for 5 years. The room went silent. The buzzing of the fluorescent light sounded like a trapped fly. It was the perfect trap. Sign the paper and admit she was weak, a hysterical girl who couldn't handle the pressure, or fight the truth and go to prison. Ilara looked at the pen. Her father had told her that the truth was the only thing worth dying for. But her father wasn't sitting in this room. I saved them, she whispered. You disobeyed, the suit corrected. Sign the paper. Ilara reached for the pen. Her hand felt heavy. This was how it ended. Not with a bang, but with a signature. The heavy steel door behind them slammed open. The commander jumped. The man in the suit frowned. Master Chief Graves stood in the doorway. He was leaning heavily on a crutch, his right leg encased in a rigid brace. He was still wearing his combat pants, stained with dust and dried blood. He hadn't showered. He looked like a wreck, but his eyes were burning with a terrifying intensity. Master Chief, this is a closed hearing, the commander said, standing up. You are not authorized. Graves didn't speak. He limped into the room, the rubber tip of his crutch squeaking on the linoleum. He didn't look at the officers. He looked at Ilara. He saw the pen in her hand. He saw the confession on the table. He reached out and snatched the paper from under Ilara's hand. He read it, his lips curling into a snarl. Psychological break? Graves read aloud, his voice scraping like gravel. Heat exhaustion? He crumpled the paper into a ball and threw it at the man in the suit. This is horse shh. Watch your tone, Master Chief, the suit warned. Private Vance violated the ROE. She went rogue. Rogue? Graves laughed, a harsh, barking sound. He turned to the commander. You weren't there, sir. You were drinking coffee in the AC. I was in the dirt. I had an RPG pointed at my team. I had a PKM pinning us down. We were dead. Do you hear me? We were dead. Graves slammed his fist onto the table, denting the metal. That girl, he pointed a shaking finger at Ilara, didn't panic. She waited until the last possible second. She neutralized 4 tangos with 5 rounds. She engaged a heavy vehicle with a sniper rifle to protect my extract. She didn't disobey an order. She followed the oldest order there is, never leave a man behind. She turned off her radio, Chief, the commander argued, though his voice lacked conviction now. She went offline. She went offline because you were giving her an illegal order to let us die, Graves roared. If you court-martial her, you court-martial me. You put me on the stand. And I will tell every news outlet from here to D.C. that command tried to let a SEAL platoon get wiped out because they were afraid of a little paperwork. The room fell silent again. The threat hung in the air. Master Chief Graves was a decorated war hero. If he went public, the scandal would destroy careers far above the rank of the men in this room. The man in the suit stared at Graves for a long moment. Then he sighed, picking up the crumpled ball of paper. He smoothed it out, looked at it, and then fed it into the shredder in the corner of the room. The official report, the suit said, his voice flat, will state that Private Vance acted under field-promoted authority during a live fire malfunction involving hostile trespassers. The incident is classified top secret. It never happened. He looked at Ilara. You are dismissed, Private. Your trial period is over. Ilara stood up. Her legs were still shaky, but her spine was straight. She looked at the suit, then at the commander. Finally, she looked at Graves. "Thank you, Master Chief," she said softly. Graves didn't smile. He just nodded toward the door. "Get your gear, Vance, and you get out of here before they change their minds." Ilara walked out of the room. The hallway was bright and empty. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the sterile air. She had survived the desert. She had survived the debrief. But as she walked away, she realized something. The girl who had walked into that room, the girl who cared about approval, about rules, about fitting in, was gone. She had left her in the spider hole. The locker room was empty. It smelled of stale sweat and floor wax. Ilara packed her bag slowly. The Macmillan rifle was already crated, tagged, and loaded onto the transport pallet. All that was left were her personal effects. Her civilian clothes, a book she hadn't had time to read. She took the ASIP candidate patch off her shoulder. It was just a piece of Velcro, but it felt heavy. She looked at it for a moment, then tossed it into the trash. It belonged to a different person. Heading out? She turned. Miller was leaning against the lockers. He wasn't wearing his sunglasses. His eyes were tired, surrounded by dark circles. "Yes, Petty Officer," Ilara said, zipping up her duffel. "My transport leaves in 20. Miller reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It was the range scorecard, the clipboard Graves had carried during the first day of the trial, the day they had laughed at her. "Chief wanted you to have this," Miller said, handing it to her. "For the scrapbook." Ilara took the paper. She unfolded it. It was the score sheet from the long-range phase. The columns for windage, elevation, and hit percentage were filled out in Graves's sharp, angry handwriting. 100%, 100%, 100%. But at the top of the page, where the biographical data was listed, Graves had made an edit. He had crossed out age 17. Next to it, in thick black marker, he had written, "Status, lethal." And below that, in the section for team recommendation, he had simply written, "One of us." Ilara stared at the words. A lump formed in her throat, hard and painful. She blinked rapidly, refusing to let the moisture spill over. This was better than a medal. This was better than a parade. "Tell him," Ilara started, then stopped. She cleared her throat. "Tell him I said thanks for the wind call." Miller grinned. It was a genuine smile this time. No mockery. "I'll tell him. Keep your head on a swivel out there, kid." "You too, Miller." She threw her bag over her shoulder. She walked out of the locker room, down the long concrete corridor, and out into the blinding Nevada sun. The heat hit her instantly, familiar and aggressive. The C-130 transport plane was waiting on the tarmac, its engines churning, ready to take her to the next assignment. Somewhere quiet, somewhere dangerous, somewhere where people made decisions that would never be thanked. Ilara Vance adjusted her sunglasses. She checked her watch. She didn't look back at the base. She didn't look back at the mountains where she had killed men and saved lives. She walked toward the plane, her shadow stretching long and thin against the tarmac. She was 17 years old, she was invisible, and she was the most dangerous thing on the runway.